Good afternoon, everyone. We will give everyone a moment to come in from the waiting room, get their audio adjusted. All right. Well, my name is Hannah Brosnan. I am the Executive Director of Mental Health America of Kentucky, joined today by Dr. Colin Davidson and by Dr. Eric Russ with the Kentucky Psychological Foundation. We're pleased to offer another webinar as part of this public education series, and I'd like to thank the Kentucky Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities, who through a SAMHSA grant support this webinar series. I will be dropping some links in the chat here in a moment for Mental Health America of Kentucky, Kentucky Psychological Foundation, and Dr. Davidson's website, which you can also see here on the screen. Additionally, MHA Kentucky and KPF would love to hear more about what mental health topics you want to know about, and we are listening. So if you have ideas for topics, you can share those in the chat or via our contact information on the websites that I will be sharing. Thank you so much to everyone who is joining us today and who will be watching on the recording later on. When the world feels unpredictable, politics, the economy, new technology, money stress can pile up fast. Today, we hope to help you uncover the hidden money habits that drive your reactions and show you how to shift from fear to clarity. With real-life stories, simple exercises, and practical tools, you'll learn how to spot your personal money patterns, focus on what you can control and let go of what you can't, and make choices that reflect your values, not just your worries. We hope that you'll walk away from today with more confidence, resilience, and a clear sense of purpose when it comes to your financial life. That being said, I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Colin Davidson. Dr. Davidson earned his PhD in clinical psychology from Oklahoma State in 2012. Since then, he's served in multiple clinical and healthcare leadership roles. He currently works as the Senior Clinical Quality Lead for Lyra Health. Did I say that correctly, Dr. Davidson?
Lyra Health.
Lyra Health, perfect,
Yep.
thank you. And also has a practice as a certified financial therapist. Dr. Davidson is the incoming 2026 president-elect of the Kentucky Psychological Association. Congratulations, Dr. Davidson, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And thanks
Absolutely.
everybody for being here.
All right, you can go ahead and get started.
Great. Why don't we jump right in? So the world is buzzing with change. It's an era of disruptive technology and new sources of energy transforming cities overnight. Fortunes are being made and lost rapidly and are fueled by speculation and growing industries. Financial markets are volatile, and there's a constant low-grade hum of anxiety. Geopolitical tensions are high, and there's a gap between the ultra-wealthy and everyone else that feels like a chasm. And while I could be talking about current day, I'm actually referring to the Gilded Age, which was in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The revolutionary technology is not AI, but the telegraph, and the new energy is electricity. Now, into this world, I want you to picture a lone figure navigating the chaos of Wall Street. This is an outsider who's constantly underestimated by the establishment. They inherited a large fortune, but this inheritance didn't bring peace of mind. It actually brought fear, rooted in a childhood where money was the only language of love and where wastefulness was the ultimate sin. This fear led this person to save every last penny, have a deep distrust of others, and to be extremely frugal compared to their immense wealth. There were even rumors that this person turned down medical care for their son, which led to the amputation of their son's leg. They seemed trapped by their unhealthy approach to money. Well, the world's most powerful men were caught up in high-risk bets. This person was focused on buying stock in valuable companies. And instead of spending their day in fancy boardrooms, had a simple desk in the lobby of a bank. And then the crash came. In the panic of 1907, the global financial system seized, the stock market plummeted, and the most powerful bankers in New York City were on the verge of collapse. The city itself was about to go under. And in this time of need, where these people turned was to this outsider who calmly lent millions of dollars at fair interest rates and helped avert a more serious disaster. So this person's name was Hetty Green. And Hetty was known in her time as the Witch of Wall Street for her unusual habits and manner of dress. At the time, she was the richest woman in America and grew the fortune that she inherited exponentially. Her story's extreme, but I bring it up to help us explore a truth that we'll explore today. The world will always feel unpredictable. Stress will always pile up. But within us, we have the power to uncover the hidden thoughts and emotions that drive our habits related to money, and to make a shift from fear to clarity and confidence. So if we think about our world today, obviously some of the things I said earlier could have applied. There are a lot of huge systemic factors that create fear for all of us. So things like economic uncertainty, that's in the headlines pretty much daily, fears of AI, political division and radicalism, inflation. And of course, this is a small sample. I could go on and on, but my guess is the reason you're attending or viewing this is because you yourself experience some of this fear and anxiety related to these things. And one of the things I think that makes these triggers for our money fears so difficult is these are outside of our control. No one person can change the course of these huge factors. So I want to borrow from ancient Greek philosopher Epictetus to help us realize what he said was some things are up to us and some things are not up to us, which seems pretty obvious, right? But I think we forget this in our routine day to day, and especially when we're feeling triggered. So those things I just put on the previous slide, I spend time worrying about them routinely and forget I can't control these directly. A modern Stoic philosopher, William Irving, expanded upon what Epictetus said, and instead of dividing it into two pieces of control, the dichotomy of control, he talked about the trichotomy of control, which essentially is there are things that are within our complete control. So the goals we set for ourselves, budgeting, saving, political engagement, upskilling, for example. There are things that we have no control over. Interest rates, the stock market, economic cycles, the decisions of politicians, automation within companies. And then there are things that we have some but not complete control over. So income, investment returns, business or career success, election outcomes, job security. So this one's maybe a little less intuitive, but much like an athlete who can't control the outcome of a game, what they can control is how they prepare for the game, right? So here, for instance, with career success, someone can't determine do they get the promotion or not, but they can prepare extensively for an interview, network, have mentors help them out along the way, that increases their chances of career success. And it follows essentially that we want to focus our efforts and energies on the things that we either have complete control over or have some but not complete control over. And we need to accept the things that we don't have control over. So if we turn to what a lot of people struggle with when it comes to money, there are many ways our habits can get us into trouble with money. And the bigger factors I was just referring to can actually be a driver of some of these things, like impulsive spending or being extremely frugal, money conflict in a relationship, debt, gambling, hoarding money, and so on. Now, there are, of course, ways we could try to problem solve and educate our ways out of these habitual patterns. But what's often forgotten are the internal components that drive these habits. So in financial therapy literature, it's talked about as money scripts or money stories, which are essentially unexamined and often stories we're not even fully aware of that drive what we do in relation to money. And these are often formed in early childhood by things like witnessing what our parents did and what they said about money, as well as any major childhood events like parents not being able to pay the rent, for instance, or being extremely frugal or careless with money. Sometimes people will essentially copy that behavior, or sometimes they'll react in opposition to the behavior, but go to another extreme. So my parent was careless with money, and then now maybe I'm extremely frugal with money. And then our own life experiences can either reinforce or change this money script. So first job, bad investments, financial traumas, like losing a lot of money, being evicted, or successes. Now, of course, there's many different stories that can develop from our history. And what research has shown is there's actually some common ones that come up that have distilled into these 4 different scripts. So we have money avoidance. This one can come up when people want to bury their head in the sand and not look at bank statements or plan for the future and just hope everything works out. This one I feel like, especially earlier in my life, applied to me, where one of my earliest money memories is I was working a paper route and wanted to get paid for the paper route a little early so I could go buy a toy at the toy store. And so I got up my courage to ask the woman who was in charge, and she kind of snapped at me and chastised me for asking for the money early. And only in retrospect can I see how that was part of forming a pattern of money avoidance early in my life. We don't talk about money. We don't think too much about money. It's greedy to do that kind of thing. Money worship is another common pattern. And this basically holds that money can solve all my problems. So people who have this type of pattern often work a whole lot, do everything they can to make as much money as possible, but often also make poor financial decisions. Money status is almost like you could think of it as the Instagram phenomenon of like people showing off their riches on Instagram, where their personal worth is equal to how much money they have. And they often want to flaunt their wealth by buying the best of everything. And unless you want a huge lottery, you're going to run out of money with that kind of approach. So unsurprisingly, people don't have great outcomes when they have this kind of money script. And then the final one is money vigilance. And this is essentially people who worry a lot about their money. They're careful with their money and frugal and try to think into the future about what can I plan for. as you may guess, this is the only one of the four that actually has positive financial outcomes related to it, because people are more cautious and more planful. Now, that said, there's a grain of truth in at least money worship and money vigilance. Money can solve some problems to the point of money worship. It's more when you go to an extreme and think it can solve all problems. And similar with money vigilance, like we heard in the story with Hetty Green, being extremely frugal also has its own problems. So we want to have some degree of awareness of what are the scripts that resonate with us based on our experience, and what does that lead us to do? So if you're willing to play along at home, I'm not going to ask you to share any of these responses, but just to reflect for yourself, either pulling out a sheet of paper or pull up a document and just think about these questions. What was your first money memory? Earliest and first memory that comes to mind for you? And what was your most painful money memory? And then finally, what did you learn from a caregiver, a parent, or whoever was your main caregiver related to money? So reflecting on these types of questions can start to get at what are these scripts that could be driving some of your own financial behaviors and habits. And then we can delve a little deeper into these by looking at what thoughts come up. For instance, a lot of people have a thought, I'm bad with money. Another common one is I'll never have enough. I can't control my spending. And we know that these types of thoughts are related to strong feelings or emotions. So things like anxiety, shame, despair, and then also can drive some of the patterns I was describing earlier in that word cloud. So perhaps money avoidance, hoarding of money like Hetty did, impulsive buying, and so on. So this is one of the places where we can start to look at what's under our control and use this stop framework to actually pause in the midst of feeling stressed or triggered by some type of money related event, whether it's a news story or something in your personal life. So the first step is essentially to stop, just pause, which is important because anything that's habitual and emotionally driven, we can go into it without even full awareness. Before I know it, I'm already buying something online, or I'm already backing out of paying for something that I thought I was going to pay for. The next step, once we paused, is to just take stock of these thoughts and emotions that are coming up. Write them down is the best approach. But if you don't have paper, you're in the moment, you can also just note them in your head. And then we want to observe any patterns from our money story. So especially if we've done any prior reflection, like, money vigilance is one that resonates with me. So I know that often when I'm triggered, I will go into more money vigilant like approach, but to an excessive degree. And so likely what I'm going to feel like doing is cutting back on like even trivial expenses, even if it doesn't make sense to. And then to proceed, or in other words, act aligned with what's important, with my values. So let's break this down a little bit and try it out. So the first step is to just think about a stressful money situation. I'd propose think of one that's maybe like a 3 out of 10 in stress level for you. Let's not start with the most stressful one that comes to mind, and then write it down. So you'll see I have an example as we go along. That's a real recent example, reading a story about a possible AI investment bubble. Just a simple 1 or 2 sentences on the situation. And then let's pause, take a slow breath, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. And next, we want to take stock of thoughts and emotions. So thoughts are always going to be sentences. Think of like a thought bubble with words in it, your interpretation of this situation. And emotions will be single words: fear, anger, sadness. Could be positive, excitement, for instance. We don't want to mix the two because that just makes it more confusing. So make sure you're separating out thought. There could be multiple thoughts, so feel free to list all of them, multiple emotions. Okay, and then observe patterns from your money story. So for me, in relation to this, reading this story was they can be internal. My first thing was to ruminate about not having a job and losing my housing. Honestly, that's where my mind goes a lot when I hear any negative economic story. But the fact that I know this is a habit and a pattern is helpful because I can be like, okay, I'm back here again. And then if I act on some of these impulses, it's to like cut back again, even on really trivial spending that could increase my enjoyment in my life. So for you, just reflect. What do you feel like doing? What's the urge that comes along with these thoughts and emotions? Okay, and then before we get to the final step, I just wanted to briefly discuss what I mean when I talk about values. So instead of going back into our old path, our habitual patterns, we can think about what is important to our lives. So that's what values mean. Like, what kind of life do I want to lead? Values are things that don't have an endpoint. They're not like goals in that way. They're more of a general direction to head, but they're tied to goals, things that do have an endpoint. And then those goals can guide specific actions that we can take. So in this example, security could be a value. It's a value I have related to finance, certainly. And a goal could be saving 3 months' salary as an emergency fund. And then I could break that down further and look at a budget and say, how much could I reasonably save per month? Okay, $250. It's going to take a while for me to get that 3 month salary, but at least I'm making progress towards that goal. And when I have to maybe decide not to go out to dinner or something, I can remember, well, this is in service of feeling secure, having that more secure life by having that emergency fund. And here's some examples of values that might resonate for some of you with relation to finances: adventure, freedom, comfort, generosity, health, security, growth, connection. Certainly not an all-inclusive list, but if any of these resonate, you might want to take note of them or add your own to your paper. And then the last step in line with that is to proceed aligned with our values. Right? So kind of like I showed in that diagram earlier, like what can I actually do that's tied to a value that's relevant here? So for me, in my example, connection is relevant because what I might want to cut back on could be related to connecting with people. So choosing to still go get coffee with a friend is aligned with my value and it's still within my budget. You know, one coffee is not going to blow my entire budget for the month unless I bought a lot of coffee. So think for yourself, what values might be relevant related to the specific situation? Are there specific things you can do in the service of that value to head in that direction? And you'll probably notice that most often the initial impulse you have in the step of observing patterns in money scripts is very different from what the value would have you do, because we're in this very emotionally driven mindset and we're not acting with our carefully considered part of ourselves. So then I just want to, as we get towards the close here, before the Q&A, revisit the story of Hetty Green, who we started with. And you may recall she received a lot of criticism for being extremely frugal. She was extremely wealthy, but didn't spend a lot of money, waited until her clothes were basically like falling apart until she bought new clothes. But there's also, that is disputed in history as well, where it's recorded that this is some lines from her favorite poem: to live content with small means, to seek elegance rather than luxury, and refinement rather than fashion, to be worthy, not respectable, and wealthy, not rich, to study hard, think quietly, talk gently, act frankly. So it's you know, over 100 years ago now. I don't know that we're ever going to fully resolve the truth here, but her son, the one who lost his leg to amputation, vigorously disputed this idea that she avoided medical attention because she wanted to save money. He said, in fact, she sought out medical attention from many different experts, and his leg was not able to be saved. And she was very generous with him and supporting him in his career, and he later became a well-known politician. Clearly, she was quite fair in her lending practices, like I mentioned earlier. She could have made a lot of money by lending at high interest rates, but she didn't do that. So the way I prefer to think of Hetty is that she was actually quite aware of what was important to her, despite the way she was raised with kind of a cold family environment. And she didn't let other people's opinions bend her to their way of viewing the world. She stood strong and stayed true to what was important to her and her habits. So the last thought I want to leave you all on is from the business partner of Warren Buffett, who passed away recently, Charlie Munger. Take a simple idea and take it seriously. So the things we covered today are not enormously detailed or difficult to grasp, but they can be quite powerful if you actually use them. Use this stop method, for instance, that I mentioned. When you feel anxious or scared, angry, sad, that's a good cue to pause. Notice what you're thinking and feeling, observe your patterns, notice what values are relevant there, and then try to take a different action. And you might be surprised at how things start to change for you. I didn't include any references throughout, but you can get some of the detailed, accessible sources here. These are 2 books by some of the experts in financial therapy that are meant for the general public that talk about money scripts and looking at your beliefs and acting more in line with your values. And then also included some web resources if you wanted further information. Financial therapy is kind of the thing I've been talking about most today. So there is a referral database if you wanted an expert to help guide you through some of these concepts. And then there's also information on financial counseling from Experian here. Financial counseling sounds similar, but it's actually more about how to get out of debt if that's your key concern. And often you can find free or very affordable financial counselors through different organizations. And then finally, a financial advisor. These are people who more think about long-term financial goals and how to plan for them. And there's some advice here on how to choose a financial advisor. Of course, I don't offer financial advice. I'm a financial therapist, but not a financial advisor. So if you do want financial advice, that's where you want to look. Okay, well, that's all I have for content, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that people have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davidson. I have my paper right here that I've been writing on as you've been guiding us
Great.
through the steps, and this has been very helpful and informative. And yeah, we have a few minutes for questions, so folks feel free to drop those in the chat and we will read them aloud. And if there's anything that you don't want to share in the webinar but want to reach out to Dr. Davidson about, you can see his email here on the screen.
I'm going to jump in here with a question for you, Colin. As you were thinking,
Sure.
especially the exercise about like what our first financial memory, I was like, I wonder what my kids would say. And
Yeah.
I wonder if you have thoughts about sort of what age to start talking about with your kids about money or how to do that, about, what constraints there might be on the family budget and those sorts of things.
Such a great point. There's a concept called a financial enmeshment. That's on one extreme of that, where you basically would talk to your kids in too much detail and use them almost like your personal therapist about all your financial worries. That's clearly not what you want to do. So some degree of shielding is important, worrying about losing a job. Most kids probably are not who you want to get to on the day-to-day about that. But I do think introducing developmentally appropriate conversations around money is really influential and important. So we have two kids that are still fairly young, and my older child is a little more capable of understanding like concepts like saving and how do you want to spend the money that you have. So we talk with her about that, as well as if she wants to do something that we say we're not going to do, we say like we can't do everything. We have a budget. We need to pay for housing, for school, for these different things. So your mother and I decide like what is the most important things to spend money on, and just kind of introducing general concepts in that way. I also would like to, when they get a little older, start introducing the idea of like encouraging saving. So perhaps something like, if they're babysitting or mowing the lawn, like if you save money, we will match that money for you. And then talk with them about like compound interest and how that money can grow, just so they're learning those types of vital habits. There are basic ideas of like, when kids are getting allowance, there's a component to spend, there's a spend bucket, there's a save bucket, there's an invest bucket, and maybe there's a charity bucket as well. And there's even piggy banks that literally have different slots for those things. So you can get very concrete with it. But I do think, just introducing it, not making it a topic that can't be talked about, but also, some level of detail is probably too much. Kids can't understand what is like a house cost, for instance, at a certain age.
Thank you so much for that answer.
Sure.
We have a couple more questions in the chat, so I'll start with the first one, which is asking if you have any additional advice on capturing or curbing impulsive spending.
Great question. That's honestly the most common thing that I see in my financial therapy practice is spending being the primary problem. That and probably like conflict and relationships being the top two. I think the first thing is tracking it essentially. So you could use this stop method, but you could also just track your spending generally. Apps can make that pretty easy. So there are some free, basically like budgeting apps you can download, or even just, if you have a single bank account, looking on a monthly basis, where is my money going? Because often people aren't even fully aware of that. You have a general sense, but oh, I spend that much on restaurants. Okay. That can be kind of eye-opening. Doing that for 3 months is often helpful because there are expenses that are not monthly, but add up over the year. So several months of investigation and basically categorizing those expenses, then tying them to where do I want my money to go? Right? Kind of to the values question. Am I actually spending my money congruent with what's important to me? Another thing that can be quite helpful is making spending as friction full as possible, right? Like the financial companies and tech companies make it very frictionless for us to spend money and even pay for relatively trivial purchases with like interest-free loans. That's the opposite of what we want to do. So sometimes even pay for as much things as you can with cash, because that's just a much more tangible way of doing things. Keep a notebook with you or maybe a note on your phone where you have to manually enter every time you spend money. That just makes it much more obvious that the spending is happening. But then I would reflect further on like what's going on to that stop framework question. What triggered this impulse to buy? What am I thinking and feeling? Can I proceed in a different way? So some of that increased reflection and slowing it down can make a big difference.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
We have a comment here in the chat that one of the viewers runs into the fallacy of adult pride or impulsivity and justification. So they really appreciate breaking it down into the values, goals, actions that are relevant to the individual.
Mm-hmm.
So a giant all caps thanks from this viewer.
That's great. I really appreciate it.
We also have a viewer who shared that they love the Greenlight app and card for their child. Do you have any experience with this that you'd like to share?
I'd be curious to hear more about it. I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Right, do we have any other questions from the audience? All right, well, I think, this person said the Greenlight app is an allowance app with saving and spending features built
Oh,
in.
excellent. I will definitely check that out.
Awesome. Well, Eric, do you have any other questions that you want to ask?
No question, just a lot of appreciation for this. I thought this was really helpful and has given me some stuff to think about too.
Thanks so much. I
Likewise.
really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Davidson, for joining us. Thank you, everyone who is watching live with us today and will be watching after. As always, MHAKY and Kentucky Psychological Foundation are open to your thoughts. So please feel free to visit our websites and contact us. And as you can see on the screen here, you have Dr. Davidson's website and email as well. So thank you again, Dr. Davidson, and we appreciate you.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Have a great day.